You have no idea. You know hard drives can be manipulated.
Are you suggesting the New York Post could participate in a conspiracy to construct the contents of the Hunter Biden laptop?
No, sir. The problem is that hard drives can be manipulated by Rudy Giuliani or Russia.
But what's the evidence that happened?
Ain't nothing changed, nothing new here to see. This ain't nothing but some political maneuvering.
America.
Welcome to the eulogy, eat it up. It's called political buffoonery.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome to This Week in DUMBmocracy, where we showcase some of the dumbest newsmakers of the week. Hope you guys had a great weekend. Late last week, there was so much buffoonery that we didn't get to cover. We're going to try to cover some of that today. I'm starting with the House Select Committee on the Weaponization of Government. There are some members of Congress who just have this air of superiority. They think they're better than everybody else, whether it be based upon financial status, level of education, or even where they represent. Congressman Dan Goldman from the People's Republic of New York City has all three of those. He's a trust fund baby from the Levi's company, the people that make jeans. He has a law degree, which between you and me ain't no great shakes. Just about anybody can get it. If I can get it, just about anybody can get it. And he represents a very posh, very liberal area of the People's Republic of New York City in Brooklyn. So obviously, when it comes to such petty things as the First Amendment and how conservatives and Republicans and basically everyone else is being treated on social media and how government has weaponized social media against First Amendment free speech, he doesn't care about that. To him, it's conspiracy theory. It's pie in the sky. It's just another Trump MAGA thing. But what happens when, in the course of trying to make that argument, you yourself come out to be the conspiracy theorist? We're going to be talking about his interrogation of Matt Taibbi and Michael Shellenberger at the last committee hearing. But before we do, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any other shows. And if you like what you see and hear in this or any other of our videos here on this channel, smash that thumbs up button, like, comment, share the show with your friends, all that good stuff. Because as you know, it all feeds that YouTube algorithm. Feed me. Special shout out to all you guys out there who have been helping grow the show and broaden the audience. Keep doing what you're doing. The show is growing every day, and thank you so much for all your help. Let's get into this exchange between Goldman and Taibbi and Shellenberger, and I want you to see how he starts off by talking about conspiracy theories and then starts espousing one himself. So for the benefit of those of you who haven't been following this House Select Committee on the Weaponization of Government, let me run it down for you. Republicans are concerned with the undue influence of the federal government, specifically the intelligence community, when it comes to the policies of social media companies and big tech for policing speech. What we've seen so far is evidence that the federal government, the intelligence community, have contacted social media companies on a wide variety of issues, whether it be for the election, whether it be for the Hunter Biden laptop story, the pandemic, a whole host of reasons. The goal of the committee is to get the government out of the business of policing speech through the use of these big tech social media companies. The argument being that the social media companies are acting as a proxy for the federal government. The federal government would flag the content, and the social media companies would remove the content, regardless of the veracity of the content. Oftentimes, we saw the federal government paying social media companies for the work they were doing, reimbursing them for the man-hours it took to take down or review this content. It's very chilling to the First Amendment. This has become so concerning that there's currently an injunction in place in the Missouri v. Biden case that's going to be taken up by the Supreme Court later on next year. Now, Democrats are trying to deflect from this narrative, talking about who else? Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the boogeyman. He's the one that's truly weaponizing government to go after his enemies. He's the one that tried to weaponize government for that insurrection on January 6th. You get the idea. So with that in mind, let's go into this interrogation by Goldman towards Matt Taibbi and Michael Shellenberger, two reporters who happen to be Democrats that went deep into the Twitter files and have been covering this story of the government's undue influence on social media and the effects it has on speech for over a year now.
My colleagues and friends from North Carolina and Florida are asking why we are talking about Donald Trump. The answer is because this subcommittee is called the Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. And because of that, the only evidence that we have here in front of us today about the weaponization of the federal government is from Ms. Troy, who has outlined in detail, and I'm sure she has more detail, how Donald Trump weaponized the federal government against his enemies and for his own political interests, and how he intends to do it again.
Now, clearly, that's not the only evidence. That's the only evidence that Goldman believes. Because, as we said earlier, there was a great deal of evidence brought forth in the Twitter files and in other outlets, the New York Post included, concerning the weaponization of government. This is Dan Goldman spinning like a top to start off his remarks.
So if we really want to talk about the weaponization of the federal government, we should talk about it, and that's Donald Trump. That's not this grand, crazy conspiracy.
Grand, crazy conspiracy. This grand, crazy conspiracy
of how the administration has utilized the social media companies against whom the First Amendment does not apply.
Crazy conspiracy theory. Dan Goldman thinks he's above all that. He thinks he's above the crazy conspiracy theory put forth by intrepid reporters who dug into actual evidence and found the proof that the federal government was using social media companies as a way to suppress speech. The social media companies were acting on behalf of the government. They were getting paid by the government. In some cases, the government was setting up conferences and different organizations that you probably heard about in the news, priming social media companies on how to deal with quote-unquote misinformation. But it's all much ado about nothing to Goldman because these are private companies and private companies can do what they want, right? Watch how this devolves for Goldman.
This is actually the second hearing, I guess our quarterly hearing now, on the Twitter files with the same witnesses that we had. In the first hearing, I asked Chairman Jordan if he could identify any evidence of the government under the Biden administration actually censoring anyone through the social media companies. He pointed out to me an email on January 22nd from Clark Humphrey to flag a tweet that was from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as evidence. The problem was, and the chairman did not acknowledge this, the tweet was never taken down. How can you have censorship if the tweet was not taken down? And
now this is a key element to Goldman's argument. How can there be censorship if things aren't censored? But the process of censorship is not just the taking down of material. It's the flagging by the government of material that it thinks is violating some terms of service for some reason. It's the review of the social media companies, and it's the decision by the social media companies as to what to do. It's an entire process. So it's not necessarily the taking down of the speech that is just the censorship. It's the government stepping in to say this should be censored when that's not the place of the federal government at all.
Mr. Taibbi, I introduced a letter that I led to X. Let's call it X now. That way we can know the difference between when Elon Musk took it over and before when it was Twitter. From November 21st. Have you read this?
No.
Well, do you think it would be problematic if X leaves up terrorist violence and propaganda in violation of the terms of service?
Terrorist violence or terrorist propaganda?
If it violates their terms of service, is it problematic?
Well, it depends on what the content is, but you know, they're a private company. They can do what they want with the content.
Aha!
Aha! Aha!
Oh, Goldman thinks he's got him now. He got his aha moment in.
They're a private company and they can do what they want with the content. Do you think it's problematic that X would profit off of terrorist violence propaganda and content on their social media platform?
Well, first of all, just to go back to
No, just answer the question. I don't have time. Do you think it's a problem if they profit off of it?
Well, if the company makes money doing what it does, I don't necessarily see a problem with that.
Okay, interesting. So let me just move on because you said the biggest concern, sir, I'm sorry, you said the
Now, Goldman is doing what pretty much everybody in Congress does when it comes to these committee hearings. When you have an adverse witness and you're trying to question them, you're cutting them off. You're not letting them give a full answer because I control the time and because my time is precious and because I have limited time. It's complete garbage. I would love it if Congress would adopt a system where the time is only utilized for when the member of Congress is speaking, not for when the witness is speaking. Let the witness give a complete answer. Don't cut off the witness, and then start the time up again for when the member of Congress starts speaking again. It would be a much better and a much fairer way of conducting these hearings. Just one guy's opinion.
The biggest concern that you had from the Twitter files was the systematic flags for social media companies. Now, the Stanford EIP that you're talking about, I'm sure you are aware, has documented that the social media platforms to whom they flagged potentially problematic tweets took action on only 35% of them.
Okay, so just so you can understand, the Stanford EIP Election Integrity Project is one of those layers in the onion where there was a partnership between government, academia, and social media, a very incestuous relationship whereby the government and this organization, which the government funded, would suggest to take down certain comments. And he's talking about 35% of the links that were provided by this EIP were actioned on by social media companies. That seems like quite a significant number to me.
And only 13% of them were removed. Mr. Shellenberger, you said the biggest problem, and let me just ask you, Mr. Taibbi, real briefly, you would agree that these flags, that the systematic flags that you saw were flags for a violation of the terms of service of the social media company, is that right?
Sometimes, but sometimes in the case of the instances like Congressman Massey, they were actually true information.
So the information flagged would be true information as well as what would be considered disinformation, misinformation, something false, something like that. But it would all be within the bounds of free speech. Taibbi is talking about something specific with Congressman Thomas Massey's tweet, which was one of those flagged as being against the terms of services, but was true. So I put it to you guys. Leave me a comment and let's talk about this for a second. Do you think it's okay for the government to flag speech to a big tech company, a social media company, as a violation of their terms of service? Or do you think that is government overstepping and violating the free speech rights of that individual whose information was flagged? Let's talk about that in the comments.
Well, that may be the case, but the flag was for a violation of the terms of service.
It's for their interpretation of a violation.
And then the social media company has to determine whether or not it is actually a violation of their terms of service. And in 87% of those flags, they were not removed.
So this is a good spot to take a break, because when we come back, the tide completely turns on Dan Goldman, and both Taibbi and Shellenberger show him exactly why even that little bit of amount, that 35%, is problematic for the government. Like what you see so far? Go ahead and smash that thumbs up button. Also, leave us a comment and tell us what you're thinking. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another show.
Mr. Shellenberger, in brief time, you said that the censorship, the biggest problem you have is the censorship that you talk about is election interference. Do you agree that Russia used social media, including Twitter, to interfere in the 2016 presidential election?
Here we go again, back to the Trump derangement syndrome. I swear, they become a one-note party. Democrats only can talk about Donald Trump. They can talk about nothing else.
Yes, thank you. Now, we've also briefly, if I may, Mr. Chairman, just have the extra time that my colleagues have had. You've talked about the Hunter Biden laptop and how the FBI knew it existed. You are aware, of course, that the laptop, so to speak, that was published in the New York Post, was actually a hard drive that the New York Post admitted here was not authenticated as real. It was not the laptop the FBI had. You're aware of that, right?
It was the same contents.
How do you know?
Because it's the same. I mean,
You would have to
CBS News
authenticate it to know
verified
it was the same
contents.
contents. You have no idea. You know hard drives can
that it's
be
a conspiracy?
manipulated.
Are you suggesting the New York Post could participate in a conspiracy to construct the contents of the Hunter Biden laptop?
No, sir. The problem is that hard drives can be manipulated by Rudy Giuliani or Russia.
But what's the evidence that happened?
Look at Goldman's face right there. Where's the evidence, Congressman? That is the exact definition of a conspiracy theory. This could have happened, that could have happened, and Rudy Giuliani did this and manipulated that, and you don't know what's in the laptop. But the problem is, we do know what's in the laptop. There's been so much coverage of this. There's been books written about this. The authentication of the material found on Hunter Biden's laptop and the copy examined by the New York Post and every other news agency out there. I believe the Washington Post even authenticated it. So what Dan Goldman here is doing is really putting forth a conspiracy theory that's been disproven by actual evidence. I can't believe that someone as superior, as learned, as smart as this egotist, Dan Goldman, got caught up like this. Again, look at his face right here. The egotist is someone I talk about in my book, Schnooks, Crooks, Liars, and Scoundrels, a field guide to identifying political buffoons, available right now on Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, and other online bookstores. The egotist is someone with an over-exaggerated sense of self-importance and self-worth, like Dan Goldman here, from a wealthy family, from an educated background, representing a very cosmopolitan district that thinks they're better than everybody else. They gain power because of their ability and their talent, but they get to a point where they think that they're smarter than everyone else. They're more clever than everyone else. Think of someone like a Michael Avenatti, who thought that he was so smart and so slick and that he was going to be president of the United States, only to be taken down by his own arrogance and his own audaciousness. Dan Goldman right now is getting a small taste of that in this testimony because he's about to get dressed down by both Taibbi and Shellenberger for stepping into this realm of conspiracy that he has no business bringing up.
Well, there is actual evidence of it, but the point is it's
There's
not
no
the same
evidence for
thing.
it, so you're engaging in a conspiracy
I'm glad
theory.
you agree with me, Mr. Shellenberger, that transparency is the most important thing. And my last question for you is, do you think it would be transparent if Hunter Biden came to this Congress and testified in a public hearing, and more transparent than if he testified privately?
Now, the background on this question is that Hunter Biden has offered to come give testimony before the committee, but only in an open committee, not behind closed doors for a deposition. The Democrats are pushing for that for some reason, in violation of the committee's rules. Hunter Biden doesn't get to dictate to the committee how it conducts its business. Only the chair of the committee and the majority get to do that. So the fact that Hunter Biden is trying to condition his testimony is completely out of order. But Dan Goldman wants to push for quote-unquote transparency here and not go by the committee's procedures. Again, completely buffoonish and arrogant.
I mean, literally, I've never thought about that. I have no idea.
You don't know?
And the crowd breaks out in laughter because they realize how asinine that question is. What should it matter to Michael Shellenberger how Hunter Biden testifies? Look at the smiles right behind him, too. They know that Goldman is a complete buffoon.
Literally never thought about
Is
that.
public testimony more
this is
transparent than
random
private testimony?
hour here. Are you familiar with the First
Mr.
Amendment?
Chairman, I
It
yield
says that
back.
the Congress shall take no action to abridge freedom of speech.
Yeah,
and that's
and-
what you just described.
Mr. Shellenberger, is 13% censorship still censorship?
Absolutely.
And the other 87% is what we call the chilling effect that the courts have long recognized that they engaged in.
Shellenberger hits it completely right. Government shall take no action to abridge freedom of speech. By participating in this election integrity project, by going to social media companies to get things taken down, they are taking action to curb and chill free speech. That's the main issue here. The fact of whether it's successful or not is immaterial. The violation by government is taking the step to even approach the social media company to do something that would affect someone's free speech rights.
That is the problem.
There's a by the way, part of the operation, Congressman
Holy
Goldman,
cow.
part of the operation was to change the terms of service. So you see them constantly trying to change the terms of service. You see them, it was 35% of the URLs that were, this according to EIP, were labeled, removed, or soft blocked. That's all forms of censorship. That censorship is not just removal.
But 65% were not. So how?
So I guess you're only entitled to free speech 65% of the time when the government approves of what's being said. Do you see how this is a conspiracy theory from Goldman? Do you see how Goldman just doesn't get free speech concepts? This is the perfect microcosm of how the government violates your rights to free speech.
Can the government be so coercive?
Does the First Amendment say that the government Does the First Amendment say the government can censor 35%?
Time of the gentleman has
They're not
expired.
censoring. They're flagging in the social
Chair
media companies.
recognizes
Under
the
coercion.
35% of a First
Chair-
Amendment? Or
Chair
It's not the
recognizes-
First Amendment. It's the terms of service, as you said, and they are flagging it for the social media companies to make their own decisions. That is not the First
The snicker there. It's not the government doing it. It's the government telling the social media companies that this exists and that they should do it. Now think about that. The weight of the federal government on anyone is a very heavy burden. But on a business, it's especially heavy because if the government chooses to act in contravention of the federal government, there could be reprisal. In fact, there's been a history of reprisal. We saw it with the IRS going after conservatives with their taxes because of the speech that they were putting out there. So forgive me for laughing along with whoever snickered at Dan Goldman for making such a buffoonish point.
Amendment. That is the terms of service.
We have just seen them.
Congressman, you're an attorney. You know that 4 federal judges have already ruled that.
And I know that it's on appeal in front of the Supreme Court right now.
And there's the arrogance of Dan Goldman. That was him laughing ha 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 at the end there. So because the Supreme Court hasn't ruled on it, the 4 federal judges who have ruled that the government overstepped their bounds in approaching social media companies to curb speech doesn't mean anything to Dan Goldman because it's still up in the air. But that is a finding in a federal court right now. And if SCOTUS happens to find that the government didn't overstep their bounds, then Congress can act to say that this action now oversteps bounds by taking up legislation that says so. So Dan Goldman is playing us another semantic game because he thinks he's superior and that he knows better. But at the same time, he's ignoring the obvious evidence out there in favor of a conspiracy theory that this is all nonsense, that the real conspiracy comes from Trump and Giuliani, and that all of this is much ado about nothing. He has his own brand of tinfoil hat. It just happens to be more posh and expensive than the garden variety one. But hey guys, that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments. Is Dan Goldman a complete egotist buffoon? Let's talk about that in the comments, and please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, like and share the video with your friends, all that good stuff, and let's continue having conversations about all the shenanigans and buffoonery that's going on every day this week in DUMBmocracy.
All views and opinions expressed here are not necessarily of the mainstream media and may offend some listeners. It's called political buffoonery.